Chinese. You can feel free to ask questions in French or any language you want, but preferably French, English, and Chinese as we go. So I'm Jean-Michel Dumont. I'm one of the 7 founding members of Asia Society France. We just opened about a week ago, so it's very fresh. And so on behalf of Asia Society and of course of Thanks for Nothing, we want to thank you for coming to this conference, which is called Mapping Out Asia, where we're going to try to define what is Asia in an hour and 15 minutes. So good luck, because that could take an encyclopedia. But we're going to try. We're doing our best. But before we do that, so very quickly, Asia Society, which opened, as I said, about a week ago, was created in 1956 to try to ensure that the world understands Asia and Asia understands the world. So we are looking as part of that in opening the Paris one, the first one in the European Union, to create a dialogue between Asia and Europe, on the cultural side, but also on other sectors. And dialogue there will be around this table, but also with you, because I intend to make you participate, because at the end of the day, and it's, we just need to ensure that everybody's mind is going on. We have around, in this panel, a panel of very diverse people, because we thought that it was important, when you look at the diversity of Asia, to look at it from different perspectives. One, of course, the geographical one, where does it begin, where does it end? The historical one, archaeological one, the influences that we have across cultures, but also across platforms, music, painting, sculptures, and so on, so fairly broad. And we have a panel here of people from different sectors, as I said, with Sabih Ahmed, who is online, and I'm not sure if we're going to see him. Okay, you've seen him. He's here. He exists. Okay, he's here. Who is an associate director and curator at the Ishara Art Foundation, curatorial work focusing on modern and contemporary art in South Asia, and he will tell you more, and everybody will introduce themselves. Arnaud Bertrand, at my left, archaeologist and researcher, but also founder of Asia Collection Network Europe, looking at art across Asian art's presence in the museums of Europe. Yessaï Karapetian, on my right, with a pianist from Armenia, who is looking at bridging with his background, music from Armenia with the West, and specialty in jazz. And everybody will introduce themselves a bit longer in a minute. Martina Koppel-Young, curator and scholar, expert in Asian art with a focus on China, and member of the advisory board of Asian Art Archive, where Sabih Ahmed worked also, so the world is small. And Yang Chie-Chang, a renowned artist, which work is pretty much everywhere on the fair. So you can see him at the Jean Boucher Jagger Gallery, at the Allison Gallery, and at the video just outside. So, and then Etsu Egami, also present at the A2 Gallery, Japanese herself, painter, but also teaching at Tsinghua University and discussing a lot about cross-culture between Japan and the West, and Japan and China. So that will work on explaining to us these diversities. So I've talked enough. So before I ask the panel to talk, I want to ask you 2 questions in the room. And the first question is, what is Asia for you? In a sentence or 3 words, define Asia from your perspective. Anybody wants to jump on that? If you don't, yes. 55% of the world in terms of population and countries. Okay, that's a good definition of Asia. Véronique? Time. Can you elaborate?
You've got 2 more words.
History and time. Okay. Creativity, innovation, speed. Okay. Diversity. So Asia. Another one, and then I've got another question for you. You're not off the hook. I'm going to then ask you a question. Countries. When I say Asia, how do you define Asia as borders and countries? We're going to define that for you later, but I still would like you to tell me something. China, Southeast Asia, Japan. Yeah? Good that you put Australia there. The Australians will be happy. Population, economy, definitely. Okay, so here we go for that. Actually, there is also Central Asia, all the countries of Stan, of course. There is, we consider that Asia definitely extends until the how do you call it in
Middle East.
the Middle East? Thank you very much. So exactly, help me when you see that I'm, we need help here. So the Middle East and all these countries. So we have artists from Armenia on my right. We've got Iran represented in the fair. So it goes very, very broad. It is historically long, geographically diverse, economically strong, linguistically enormous. And so what we're looking at here is really how do we see it from everybody's perspective. And so because I'm I have the choice to begin, I'm going to begin by the history and I will turn to Bertrand. Because I'm linear, I'm very, let's begin with history. We'll talk about the rest after. And the question for you, Bertrand, is you specialize in history and archaeology, specialist in Central Asia and China. And so you've seen clearly the influences going on across Asia, the movement going there. Sorry, I'm keeping moving the microphone. I hope it's not disturbing to you. I'll try to be better. How do you see those influences? How can you describe the impact it had on the cultures and the geographies? And here is the microphone.
Okay, so how much time do you want to answer the question?
An hour and 15 minutes.
Okay, so gonna be yeah. Yeah, I generally never manage to finish my classes. So, do you want me to introduce myself? That's what you want. You wanted. Okay. Okay. So, hello to everyone. And yes, absolutely. I will do both. So, thank you for the ASS Society for your invitation, France. Thank you also for thanks for nothing. Also for inviting me. And great to meet everyone here. And thank you all to be here. So, well, in simple words, yes, I will define myself as an archaeologist. I worked in China for a long time near Dunhuang in Gansu region. So if you know maybe the manuscripts of Dunhuang, this is where I was working and doing a lot of kung fu with the guards of the caves for a long time. And I worked in Central Asia and Uzbekistan for a long time also in different diggings by the French. And so after that, well, I was in charge of giving classes to the Catholic Institute of Paris on Asian history and archaeology, actually looking at the same things that you were talking about. The idea is how can we redefine the story of Asia while looking to materials from Asia and not from the West, which is quite complex. And well, to answer your question, I will go directly to the ending. I would say that there is no border between Central Asia and China. I don't see either one of them. And I will start maybe with the language, because you were talking about it. Imagine yourself first BC, diplomat going from Chang'an, which is actual Xi'an in Shanxi, to Tashkent in Uzbekistan. Now, you would think that this person speaks Chinese like this. 你好，我是中国人这样吧。In fact, his words, his use of Chinese is much more closer to Vietnamese or Cantonese today. For example, Lulan in this period would be pronounced Kro Kran. So it has nothing in common with the Chinese you hear, which is highlighted from the Tang period and so on. Which means in the languages logic that China and Central Asia are much closer in the way they speak. That's one thing. The second is that this so-called Silk Road, which is a 19th century invention, the reality is that the circulation of goods from China to what is China? That would be a good question also. It's very complex, but between what we call now China and Central Asia and Mongolia and Tibet was always working all the time. There was archaeologists have find it 6,000, 7,000 years ago from the Common Era, some relationships between these regions. So there's always been connections, always. And there's never been closure like we think about it today. It makes no sense. And we see it to everything concerning Chinese art and everything concerning Central Asian art. Both respond. I think you all know the painter Mi Fu, for example, of the Song dynasty, who is very famous for drinking a lot and for sometimes doing some incredible paintings and calligraphies. Well, he is from a very long distance Sogdian family, which is Sogdiana, I think you know, in actual Uzbekistan. And he's completely Chinese when you say this is not a Sogdian painting when you look at it, but in fact there is a link. So you take emperors from the Tang dynasty, they have also Turkish lines. You talk about the Xiongnu from the steppe working with the Han dynasty. That was a long time ago. They were always in connection. I work on the Great Wall, for example. Now the Great Wall was useless, only for maybe just not losing yourself in desert. It was roads, but their use as defense system was not there because there was always opening from one part to the other. So this is, I think, a very recent, geographical idea that countries were closed, and that you were opening markets and diplomacy from one part to another, like we say Japan opened in 1870, which is a reality for West, but it's not a reality for the East. And it's especially not a reality for old histories. All these people were in connection. I'm going to stop there because it can take a long, long time. And I hope I answered your question.
I think you did. You absolutely did. And that shows the complexity of defining what Asia is, but also the interaction that they are. And one of the points that you talked about is the movement of people. And I would like to turn to Sabih Ahmed because when we discussed about the role of the diasporas, people migrating from one place to the other and becoming local and changing their perception of their culture, but changing the cultures around themselves. And I think that Sabih, I'm turning to you, and maybe you can elaborate on that, but you introduce yourself first, better than I did.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible over there.
Yes, you are.
Yes? Okay, excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. I wish I could be with you, but I'm equally happy that I'm still with you virtually. My name is Sabih Ahmed. I'm the Associate Director and Curator at the Ishara Art Foundation in Dubai. Formerly, I was a senior researcher with Asia Art Archive. So I think the question posed just now is also referring to some of my archival work. So just to quickly outline a few things that might also be the response to this question. My work as a curator involves deep research, and that research is primarily informed by a lot of work that me and my friends and colleagues have been doing at Asia Art Archive, where we consider the archives not as a static resource for scholars and historians, but as a dynamic site for critical and creative processes. And we primarily worked on artist archives. And this allowed us to really look at practices in much more complex ways than just as a production of artworks that artists have to make. It allowed us to map how ideas travel, how travels of artists themselves informed practices and places as well in relation to world making or place making. And, you know, in relation to Arnaud's presentation, being an archaeologist, working as an archivist in the 21st century over the past decade has felt like working like an archaeologist in the middle of an earthquake, right? Because everything is moving so fast. And this is really what brings me to Ishara Art Foundation, where we're located in Dubai. And if you know anything about the UAE or the Gulf, you know about its vast migration flows, a large diasporic population. And I want to say that we have to consider migration and diaspora as a contemporary condition, not as an exception to the norm. Everyone is on the move. The idea of home is much more complicated. And this is what we really are looking at Ishara Art Foundation. The mission is to complicate geography. And how do we do that? We do that by looking at South Asia not as a geographic category, but as a historical category. And with each moment in history, this geographic formation keeps changing. The lines, the borders, the movements, the flows, they keep changing. It's not a static geographic location. And we do this at Ishara using exhibitions, programs, a reading space, and primarily drawing itineraries of contemporary art. So what I mean by that is, instead of making lists of who all belong to Asia, who all are based in Asia, how do we look at travel patterns, migration patterns of ideas, of material, of archives, of art practices, and how do they end up forming new categories, new kinds of configurations? So in relation to archives, in relation to diaspora, I think if I were to sum up a response to the question, it would be to define Asia in a much more relational way. If Asia for the longest time has been considered East, it has been considered the Orient, maybe we have to think of it in relation to a different formation. What does Asia stand for today? It is probably a former East. It is both an empire and colony. It is where mythology and history meet. And I think when we start looking at art practices, these ideas really come to the foreground. And how do we bring that into curation and research is what I do.
Thank you very much. Very good answer. And from this, I would like to actually bring it to individuals and turn to Yessaï, who is actually part of this diaspora that really came from Armenia to France and has built his culture based on this heritage, but into a new heritage here by growing up in France, into a platform with music, with traditional music and jazz. So maybe you can tell us how this has really created your personality, but also how you put that into your creation, and then how you transmit through music that influence.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm a piano player and a composer, and I'm born in Armenia, but I grew up in France, and I'm part of this diaspora. And I think that this double culture found in jazz music a very important and deep way to be expressed, because jazz, by its very nature, is a music that by the improvisation allows every culture to dive in, and that's the only form of musical expression. I mean, the closest form of musical expression I found to be able to express that complexity, and that complexity of geography you're talking about, of history, of how the cultures move and nourishes each other. And Also, jazz music is an Afro-American art form that is born in the United States. So it's by studying their culture that you can develop in jazz music. So what I'm trying to do basically is connect the Afro-American culture, the European culture that I grew up in, and my Armenian heritage. And I'd say that one way of connecting this is to respect each culture you are touching in your art. And by respecting, you need to study, you need to be extremely honest, extremely vulnerable, and be willing to learn. And the only way to connect and to unite, to me, is by understanding, and instead of dividing by definition, not trying to define things. And here, I know we're going to try to define a lot of stuff, but I think that the deep message that we all share, I'm sure, is that we want to understand, we want to create connections, and we want to understand each other so we can unite in a way. So that's what I'm humbly trying to do with my heritage, my culture, the place I grew up, France and Europe in general, and the Afro-American culture in the United States that is itself extremely diverse. So even though Armenia historically, culturally, and politically has been long linked to Europe, its position in the South Caucasus makes it take place at the arbitrary border between, if we look to geography in old ways, of Europe and Asia. So it makes it a transcontinental country. So yeah, so I'm looking forward to see how we can connect and write more history of Armenia, turned also to the east, more to the east, and it to be more expressed. Thanks.
Thank you, Yessaï. And you're right, a lot of these definitions were arbitrary, and we just live with that. But one thing which is clear is that the dialogue, the creation, the mutual impact on one culture on the other is what really we're all about, trying to build those bridges, and the fair represent that very, very well to Asia now. I'm going to turn to Tia Chang now to ask a very similar question. You were born in China. You were influenced by the classics of China, but also with the masters of Europe, the European masters. You created your own style at the beginning when you were in China. Then when you moved to Europe, you've evolved. Tell us more of that evolution and what you, the creative process that you are using.
Okay, hello. I'm an artist. Yeah. So when I was in China, I'm really working very hard and study very hard. This is China. So after I'm living here, I still working very hard and study very hard. This is Chinese. But interesting is, I'm living here, I understand more China. When I was in China, it's really too much for me. So 110 years ago, only 1% Chinese, they can read and they can write Chinese. They can speak Chinese, of course, but most of them, they don't know how to read. They don't know how to write. This is Chinese, very interesting. There are 3 big parts. Speaking is one part. Everybody can speak it. And writing is really difficult. And read is also very difficult because there are so many different ways. So after the revolution, it's the Mingguo, Sun Yat-sen or Chiang Kai-shek revolution, and then they built up so many kindergarten, school, and everywhere. And then until now, they are 90, even 100% they can write, they can read. This is totally changed. In whole the history of China's 5,000 years, big change is in this 100 years. So finally, I feel China is like this. You have to read, you have to write. So I use brush more than 63 years. So it's really amazing. When you use the brush, you feel every power from China or from somewhere. I can control it because I know brush well. Just you say, Mi Fu for me is really a model. Huh? So this is really interesting. So I'm continue to use brush even in France or in Europe. I still use the brush. Maybe they don't understand, but now I feel they really like it. Huh? So I don't know how to continue. But if I want to continue, I have to speak Chinese because it's very complicated. If I tell you what Chinese is, I cannot use my English, my poor English, to tell you what's going on. So, yeah, you can help me some. Okay. 就像我是一直以为我是一个士来要求我自己的，这个很有意思，你解释一下。
He looks at himself like a Chinese literatus, so lettré, un lettré chinois, and that's also a kind of a way how he wants to live his life.
这个很有意思，因为中国有个字叫进士啊，进士你必须要不断的要求学习自己，最后考上去了，你才能够达到那个高度。我也是个士，但是只是一个学士。
Yeah, he is in the word 士 is also a title that you obtained when you studied and you had your examinations, and then you could obtain a government position and another title. And so he says he is a 学士, which would be, of course, a modern equivalent to a bachelor degree. Okay, see, he still has the 士 in his modern title.
Of course,
but
I'm okay.
Traditionally, you had to be a 进士 really to be able to get a good government position, and then you could also go back to your hometown and make all the area where you were brought up flourish. So this was really a very important way. Learning was a key to the world, or to power, and to culture, and to knowledge.
因为中文那个汉字它是有能量的，它是一个符号，它是一张画来的，它跟那个另外的语言不一样，很特别。
So actually, as you know, Chinese characters are pictographs, so that's very different from most of the other languages.
It really look like a painting. So the energy, if you know the Chinese, you can get the energy from the Chinese. For example, this is 士。
Yeah, you don't need to show me.
士就是下面一个十就满的丰满，下面只是个一，就是从一到了十，又从十回到一，这是圆满回归。
So he explains the character. That's the character for 士 for this title, and it consists of two parts. The upper part would be 10, and the lower part is 1. So from 1 to 10 means it's the whole, it's complete. So
But after 10, when you get full, you come back to the beginning, to 1. So 士的意思就是说，你要了解整个自然规律，你要懂，所以你才能够回归自然。所以它整个是自然态的。
So it's actually it's about a kind of holistic world, a kind of holistic world view. So you have to understand everything to be able to understand the basic principle and the essence.
所以你学习的越多，你就怎么说呢？就是你就越觉得自己不够，因为它就是个很神秘的一个系统，但是总是能得到的。所以我的理解就是说，中国这是个神秘国家，但是也是一个可以看得见的一个很具体的一个国家。所以你必须懂这3个语言，讲、读跟写。
So of course this means you have always to learn and to advance to be complete. Finally, eventually you will succeed. But as he said in the beginning, what is most important that you know how to speak, to write, and to read. Otherwise, you won't be able to understand the culture.
所以这个文化最后一句话，它是个很善良的一个文化，它没有进攻性。
So it's actually a very peaceful and kind culture. It's not a culture that likes to usurpate other places.
Well, thanks, Yichang, for a good explanation of your process, creative process, and what brought you where you are today, which is really interesting. And I'm going to turn to Martina now to ask her journey, clearly coming from the other way around, coming from Europe, discovering Asia, Asian art, and then looking really at that journey. And as clearly you're very close with Yichang, tell us more about that journey and where you are today.
Well, hello, thank you for being there and thank you for the invitation. I am Martina Kappel-Young and I studied Chinese language and Chinese art history in China, also in Germany, but in China in the 1980s. In Beijing at the Central Fine Arts Academy, and the mid-1980s were the time of contemporary Chinese art. So before going to China, or why did I study Chinese? I think I was seduced by what Huang Yongping called in the mid-1980s the Eastern spirit. So I remember when I was a child, I read a book about Zen Buddhism, and the title was Hear the Voice of the One Hand. And this was the big riddle for me, so I always wanted to hear the voice of that one hand, and I think that's maybe one reason why I went to Asia. And well, this Eastern spirit Huang Yongping speaks about, actually, I think that's what I want to speak about today, is actually is already something that is not purely Eastern anymore, because what did Huang Yongping discover the Eastern spirit is actually Western thought, like Wittgenstein, Western contemporary and modern artists like John Cage and Marcel Duchamp. And through these Western influences, he only started looking into his sources, into his origins, and found again Taoism and Zen Buddhism. And maybe, so my journey was the other way around, but through living with Yichang and through starting together with him his career in the West, I saw the way how the West could receive his work, and that was very interesting for me. I don't know if you saw his exhibition in the Musée Guimet with the big monochrome black ink paintings, and why could they easily have a success here in the West? I guess because the Western audience would read them as modern art linked to abstract expressionism, and they have nothing to do with it. But visually, of course, we can relate to them like this, but they are deeply based in his origins.
Mm-hmm. And it's fantastic to look at the two sides of the coin really here in a very personal way on how the two cultures have been really bridging together and looking at it from the different perspective. And so we'll continue with more cross-culture question with Etsu here, who is Japanese, who, as I said, has lived in China, lived here, and who is especially looked and studied the influence of the West on Japan and vice versa, and the interaction between China and Japan. And maybe you would want to talk more about that after introducing yourself also.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for Asian Society inviting me for this special conference, and thank you for Michelle's introduction. And I'm Etsugami, I'm the artist. And also, as Michelle introduced, I am now in Tsinghua University as a postdoctor, and I'm also teaching in Tsinghua University. And I also I was born in Japan, but I grew up in Washington, D.C. and also Germany. So I also went to CAFA, Beijing, to study art and also to go to Germany. So myself, I went to many countries and influenced by many culture. So for artists, I do short description. My work is about communication and miscommunication. So I use the installation and also do painting, like a drawing, the portrait, using like parallel lines. So I always thinking what's the origin of language, and want to rethink about human instinct and rethink about the society constructed by the language. So so for me, I went to Beijing at the 2012, and that time Japan and China is very close each other, but actually when I went to CAFA, I found it's totally different. I got the culture shock sometimes. Yes, I mean, for the art education or the student painting is different from Japan, but I think it's very attractive, and I want to discover why the difference between these two countries. So I then know the history behind the two countries different. After also Japan is more influenced by United States, I think, and also in China, CAFA also have influence. They have 5 studio in oil painting class, and the second studio they influenced by Soviet Union, like a Russian realistic painting. So I think it's very interesting. And I also, from studying in China, I can see the other way to see Japan or Japanese art history. So and then I started my work, and I got Forbes Asia 30 Under 30 and got the prize by Culture Agency of Japan government, went to New York. So in that time I was in New York, I also do my artwork and also do research about how the United States or how the Western see the Asian art. So I found it's very interesting that not only United States in 1989, I think the Pompidou do like the magician. Yeah, that is a very important exhibition. That time they put the African art and also Asian art inside to showing in the Western audience. Then also in the MoMA do the exhibition about the third world artist inside. So this is very attracted me to how the co-influence each other, Western and East. So I also I make the artwork, but also I do some research, like between in modern time Japan and Western. Also, many Japanese artists went to to Paris, I think, especially to study oil painting, because I think the modern time is very, very, very interesting, very attractive. At the same time, is very complicated, because there's many history behind this. But also in Japan, they went to Paris to study oil painting, and then they, as you said, it's 1868 is a Meiji Revolution, and then they want to westernize. But at the same time they westernize, at the same time the nationalism coming up in 1920s. So it's very interesting. They westernize, but at the same time they find their identity and face to their identity. So that's why I think the modern is a starting point of globalism, and the now time is like a post-globalism, I think. So it's more important to rethink about the modern, their co-exchanging, and how the artists face to their identity or face to the Western culture as an Asian artist. So also Zhao Wuqi and Sang Yu, and also the Japanese Fujita or Kuroda Seki, they go to the Paris, and then they choose many different decisions. Someone back to the Chinese painting, like Xu Beihong, they back to they become the director of CAFA, and he paint the horse, but actually he paint ink painting. But actually, when he was in France, he studied oil painting. So also in Japan, some artists back to Japan, he changing from oil painting to the Japanese painting. It's very interesting that you can see the many diversity to how the artists face to the cross culture, then they do the different decision, and we can see the diversity, and it is more in richness about how we see the now world about this complicated or this cross culture world. How the Asian can, what the way Asian can do, or what the possibility is.
Thank you very much. And I actually would like to echo what you just said. On the post-globalized world now, clearly things are changing. And with Asia, with a bigger role, a bigger weight in everything, population, economy, culture, and so on, it will be very interesting to really look at what's next. What, from our perspective, and we've seen now that the people on this panel have all a very different background and perspective, what do you feel is going to happen next in terms of what are the opportunities of creativity for the post-globalism world? Cultures are blending. We have influences going global. We have diasporas around the world which are really moving around. So I would like to go around the table and ask all of you if you have any comment on that. I mean, how do you see the future? Where do you see it shaping? And where do you see the role of Asia in that shape? Who wants to take that one?
Well, I think post-globalized world does not exist. I think the world has been globalized ever since it existed. Yeah, and I think it won't end to be globalized today. It's just a question how we deal with the globalization, and I like very much what you said. You have to have a respect for the other cultures, and that makes you vulnerable. And so I think we have to admit our vulnerability and to be able still to deal with each other. And I think if artists can help us do that, then we have a future.
Yeah, for example, when I was student, I learned very hard from Japanese art. And I learned very hard from Ihak art, because for me this is very similar culture. So yeah, it's true, because I don't know the future. But and also 100 years ago, when the Japanese painting, they saw in France, and finally there's so many great artists, they copied the Japanese painting. So this is youth art is very, very happy, very fantasy.
So you seem to say that we'll continue sourcing from the roots and the tradition, cultural traditions, but as the world becomes more uniform, how do we keep those traditions alive is a question that will still want to be answered one way or the other. So I'm not sure if you wanted to answer that one, or if we ask, do you want that one? Mm-hmm. Yes, there you go.
You just said, you talked about how your art was accessible to European Western audiences, as like it looked like I don't know a lot about like art and everything, but like I'm into the music, but I mean visual, but like the modernism and you talked about like currents that people could relate to, even though the art has nothing to do with it. And I think that's one way to use the tradition to create new things. Like the same is possible in in music. For instance, like when I use old ways of constructing a scale, a musical scale, like in Armenia and in the Middle East, we never thought about a musical scale as like the 7 notes, like do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do, or C, D, E. We think about like as groups of 4 notes, and the 4th note is the first note of the next 4 notes. And you can construct scales that are limitless. You can construct musical scale that doesn't stop in an octave and doesn't stop in the human voice, but like beyond, on both ways. And when I use concepts like that to improvise in the jazz context, people think it's something new. And so people start studying this very, very ancient concept of music, and it sounds completely, it's breaking new ground, used in other contexts, with another sound, and just with your own perspective on who you are right now in 2022, where you are at this very day, what did you eat, what did you say, and like the improvisation allow you to do that, to express yourself like right now. Like now everybody is talking, nobody wrote what he's saying, right? But like with our background, we just create discourse that can be shared with you, and maybe and that's what jazz is about, and that's what music is about, and yeah. So I think I just wanted to resonate with your work.
I will turn to Sabih actually to ask him the South Asian perspective on that one. If you're here, Sabih?
Yes.
Yes.
Am I audible? Hello?
Yes.
Hello? Yes?
No.
Okay. I think a very important question, and I'm sorry, I'm going to bring a slightly more grim picture to this, because with the current population of Asia and the density in South Asia, I think for the future we're faced with very serious challenges of how really to think the world, where because of climate change, the kind of catastrophes, the kind of problems that we're going to see are going to affect large populations. How do we want to think about art and culture? How do we want to think about the mobility of people and places that they can inhabit? Because places are going to become uninhabitable and large densities of population are going to have to be displaced. What does that displacement mean culturally in terms of its reconfiguration? Because it's not as if there's a place to go. The places that are to go are going to be places that have to experience a sense of hospitality. And so, like for the future of Asia, I think we're going to have to deal with very serious political, social, climate-related, and cultural issues, all of which are going to be very connected. And I think these are questions that are going to rise from Asia and South Asia. So, like at Ishara Art Foundation, we're currently having an exhibition of an artist who's been practicing for the past 4 decades. Her name is Navjot Altaf. She has been working in areas where a lot of coal mining has been happening and the displacement of people. So the question of diaspora is obviously not just a question of people looking for better jobs or people who have no homes to live in anymore because of forced displacement. And how does art come in this picture? How does art make us see things differently? How does art make us see things that are not being visible? Her work has been attempting to do that for several decades. Then how do we want to rethink the world? So for the future question around Asia and South Asia and how art can respond, I think it's going to have to be artists as much as scientists, as much as policymakers, to really reimagine the map of the world and where and how culture is going to be able to respond to this shift that's kind of looking inevitable.
Thank you very much. Grim indeed, but fascinating. And I think Arnaud has already some comments on that one.
I've got about 10 comments, but I like the idea of jazz. I'm going to think of this now for next time because I'm a very fan of jazz and this is a fluid discussion. I'm going to respond a bit like, okay, he's not there. This is John Cage. The idea of what will become Asia now and how it will be important, I see it as somehow the response of how Western people took care of Asia in the 19th and 20th century. And obviously, when you look at it, you do understand that, especially after COVID, you can see it really, how Asian art museums in Europe, this is part of my work, are getting old, very old, and have difficulties to, simply find money to take care of their collections. And why is that? It's simple. It's because there are about 500 to 600 Asian art museums in Europe we don't know of. I mean, you always know of your Guimet and British Museum and V&A. There are so many others in every countries, from Ukraine to Lithuania, and I'm discovering it every time one day. But they are all struggling from the same thing, is the money that comes for making exhibitions come from Asia. Korea Foundation from Japan, comes from China, comes from Singapore. It's always from there. Why is that? Because they have an interest for this culture that they want to understand how it arrived in Europe and then how it in some way come back in Asia for their people, which is the similar situation with Africa. So it's not really grim, it's just that we have to maybe look at it differently regarding Asia. And I would respond to what you said both. The next step is not to be afraid. I think that's very important. You know that the origin of the word Silk Road is, it comes from the idea, and it's a 19th century expression, but it comes from the idea that with the creation of a global world, the Silk Road is the representation of fear of having Asian people mixed with European people. You know, it's the same idea of Viking, who arrived, and the Viking make the Europeans strong in the Middle Age time. So with this mix of people, Asia was a danger suddenly, and the Western had to control it. Now, we are in certain way paying this way of seeing things today. And we have to transform it. We have to not be afraid and not look at Chinese as a whole. It doesn't exist. I don't feel like a sinologist, about all China. I don't know all China. I work on Dunhuang. I can't speak of Shanghai or Yunnan. I'm not a specialist of these different cultural spaces. And I would finish with the quotation of someone who understood it very early, is Père Luc, who is a missionary, a French missionary, and he was working in South China. And the thing is, he said, there's a lot of, we can't be rude here, I imagine. Okay, so that's good, because I'm always rude. Oh, that's good, okay. There's a lot of bullshit in everything that the Western travelers said about Asia when they came back in Europe, talking about ships and trips and marketing and diplomacy. And he was just a simple missionary, speaking Manchu, perfectly, and Mandarin. At this time, we would say Mandarin, not Putonghua. And he was also speaking Tibetan. And so he arrived, in this China, and that he was in complete transformation during the Taiping revolt. And he said, people not only don't understand China, people think of China as a whole world, a whole dangerous world, when in fact I can only talk about the country and even the city I am in. And the rest is a foreign space. So once you take off this idea of seeing it as a nation and just as people and multiple cultures, then you start being an artist again, I think. And that changes the perspective. I mean, that's the way I see things, at least.
Martina, you seem to want to react on that.
This understanding is interesting. I think when you can imagine, when I studied in the Chinese painting department, but after the Cultural Revolution, when many young people, they want to continue to study in academy, so I was so hard to go in, because you have to use very good way from the Russian way. 有可以就是说考进去必须用一个俄罗斯的方式能够进去国画系，所以你觉得这个怎么回事？
Well, I mean, I don't know why you say that now, but it's okay. Yeah, he says it's what for him is very interesting is if there is some kind of misunderstanding in the rules or premises that are set. For example, he is an ink painter and he started out learning ink painting, but when he wanted to get into the art academy, he had to learn socialist realism. So, which is a huge misunderstanding. Why would he have to learn socialist realism to be an ink painter? Yeah. And this changed really the course of Chinese painting.
Yes.
Well, but what did you say in the end? I forgot.
I said not to see Asia as Asia, but just as a thousand
Yes.
regions.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I agree completely. And I mean, especially you are Cantonese, and he thinks Cantonese and not in Mandarin. And you mentioned before all the different languages that are spoken and were spoken throughout history, and also in different territories. And I mean, Mandarin became the lingua franca at a certain point.
It's true. Do you mind if I respond to this? Do you
Go
mind
for
if
it.
I? Okay. Well, that's the second problem. Is how universities and research people don't understand this, because they they always say that Korea and then Japan was influenced by China by the scripts. But when you look at the chronology of China, do it on Google. Look at the chronology of China. Look at the chronology of Japan. Chronology of Japan, Yamoi period is finishes around 30 BCE, whilst the chronology of China is very complex already for the whole period, because practically no one did some diggings and some work on this antiquity period, where Western people were not at all involved at any cost and nothing. It was simple trading logic between Asian countries, from Philippines to Australia to Korea, Japan, and Manchuria, everything, which was, you can't even talk about this by countries. But there's a very important American specialist of cities, and she said that there would be, an American, of course, said there would be no big capitals in Asia without China. But she's not an archaeologist. How can you say that when you don't look at the Bronze Age in Japan or in Korea? I don't understand how you can get to this conclusion. It doesn't make any sense. And you see, that's the problem. It's because the sources are all difficult to have. Your first idea is to think that the logic is that it came from China, then went to Korea and went to Japan. It doesn't work like this. It's always, the Japanese would say differently, especially with the dragons and the claws that are reduced progressively.
I would like to go back to the future, though. We were asking questions about what is going to happen in the future, especially as we're getting closer to the time of closure. Exactly. So if I understand well, basically, we cannot talk about Asia as a whole and its influence on the West, because we're a globalized world. But on the other side, we don't understand countries as a whole. You don't understand China, but just your community and so on. And with social media, we're also becoming increasingly fragmented on tribes, basically. So is the future of creativity, the future of influence based on that fragmentation, not on these big blocks as we're always talking about, and Asia taking over in terms of not only economy, but also creativity and so on, but actually in smaller regions, smaller cities, smaller cultures, smaller languages, communities, diasporas, really creating a new innovation. I love this term. Something new, Is that what we're looking at? Anybody want to bounce back on that? Here you go.
Yeah,
you said yes, but you take the microphone. Yeah. That's okay.
Quickly, it was just, I think that we still need to dream this future and visualize it and create it, and it's open, and that's the, that's what's great with it. But I think that one of the keys is that we talk a lot in terms of countries, in terms of continent, in terms of, like, we try to generalize and say these things, but both of you just talked about like how it's more complex. It's more like in this region, in this very village, in this very place in the world, they speak like that, they cook like that, they this is the signature of this specific branch of this art. And like, for instance, in Armenia, two villages that have 2 kilometers away, they don't speak the same with the same accents. So therefore their music is not like, the accents are not at the same place. They don't walk the same, like, and it's the same in every place in the world, of course. And I think this consciousness, the consciousness of this diversity, kind of makes it obsolete to look at things like in terms of countries, in terms of nations, which I think we could do a whole talk about just how nations, I mean, were created and why. I don't know. Yeah, but I mean, so it creates maybe it allows maybe the humility then to respect and create a future that is in conversation and that is conscious of this conversation and not like flying away from it because we are afraid of what we don't know.
Okay. Yes, I really love the Yang Laoshi. You talk about the misunderstanding, because as I said, I grew up in many countries, so I always like a misunderstanding and miscommunication. So, but I think that miscommunication sometimes give new inspiration, and miscommunication, misunderstanding is a new development. So when you see the art history, or as I said, you can see the modern art history co-influence between East art and Western art. For example, in Japan, they in 1920s they know the how to say, post-impressionism, and they see many magazine talk about the Van Gogh or these kind of things. So, but they only see from the magazine, from the paper. They didn't see the real painting, but they imagine the painting is only a black and white, no color, but they imagine the color. So actually these things influence many that time Japanese artists. So for me, I think the way of communication is like a rainbow. Every color is very bright, but not confusion, like not melting each other. It's parallel line, but it's still very beautiful. Every color is shining, and also the symbol of dream and hope. So I think this is the symbol of communication, and yes, like people fall in love because of a misunderstanding. So yes, so.
As we're getting closer to the end, I want Sabih again because we don't see you, so we don't know if you want to say something or if you want to contribute until we ask you. So I'm not sure if you want to jump in on anything that we've discussed.
No, I'm listening, and I am listening in rapt attention. Nothing further I want to say. I mean, just one little thing maybe, that to look at the rich and deep past as well as the future of Asia. I'm reminded of a famous line by John Coltrane, since we're all talking about jazz. And he says that I start in the middle of a sentence and move in both directions at once. I think that's what we're kind of talking about.
And because we're going to have to wrap it up in a few minutes, or even I think 2 minutes, I will just maybe end by one thing, which I don't want to open a new conversation which will take us all night, but to go back to our subject, which was supposed to be mapping out Asia. After everything you've said, if I had an assignment from school or something to me, like map out Asia, after what we've discussed, I would just answer like, don't you even dare trying to map Asia. Because it's not a region, it's 1,000 places or like 1,000,000 places. Would you agree with that? And just one other thing, and I don't want a video open, but if I had to take that assignment, my first idea would have been to go to Musée Guimet, which is the Asian art museum, and see what's around, and so what's supposed to be the definition of the Asian, and just like maybe in a word or two, what is wrong about that, and what is right about that.
No, actually, we have a lot an immediate reaction, but then after I think we just need to go around, okay? But there was like inspiration.
Yeah, it's because of the Musée Guimet. Guimet had the idea that the museum had to be a religion museum regarding any kind of cultures, not just Asia. So it wouldn't be a good way to start, I think. If you would do just a mapping map of Asia in France or just Paris, you would look at all the artists from the 18th, 19th, 20th century, because they have all be connected to Asia. And that's a bit like that's the beginning of something that made me inspire you. It always starts with this, you know, Guns N' Roses, and but you would look at Boucher. Boucher, you all know Boucher, you know, and the paintings. He had an Asian collection. We don't talk about him. Rembrandt, Rubens, all these already had connections with Asia. Were inspired by Asia and India, and the reverse also inspired them. So you would look at all of this. And just understand that maybe map Asia is mapping out Europe also.
Hello. Yeah. No, I stopped by and I heard this wonderful conversation. I was like, I'm going to go because I want my opinion to be heard as well. No, hello. I'm Marine Venschenmeck. I'm the director and co-founder of Thanks for Nothing. And I don't know if there is much more to say. I'm sure there is plenty. But actually, if you don't mind, special guest in the end. It's just that I want maybe to help him. Yeah, actually, there was a... C'était un bon lapsus. I want to invite him, Alireza Shojayan, if you want to join us. Maybe we can add a chair with you. So Alireza is an Iranian artist. Actually, he was part of a project, a commission project last year for Asia Now. And hello. And yeah, so it's like everybody's still gathering. We'll finish with like 20 people coming. Really? Really? Okay. Usually in contemporary art, it's the opposite. Okay. Well, so we'll come to your panels then to support you. And so I was saying, Alireza was part of the programming of Asia Now last year, but actually the fair couldn't host his work anymore because, like, the foundation that supported the project was, for some reasons that maybe you're gonna explain, like they have concern about it. So I know that your work couldn't be presented.
It's better if you say my work was.
Wait. It was removed, if you want, and so anyway, it was for Alireza. It was a very strong and hard moment. So we think that after a year, maybe it was the right time to give a bit of our time to him so he can explain why he was, as an Iranian artist, so shocked by the decision. So the idea is not to pursue a sort of polemical decision and so on, but just to give you like a time to talk about it, especially because today, before the different panels that we organized since this morning, we also had a focus on Iranian situation, and we had two wonderful Iranian artists that spoke about it. So I thought that, you know, we are an open platform, and so I think it was important to address it. So maybe as a first, if you want, you shared a video that you wanted to play. So can you explain to us in a minute before we played the context of the video?
This is Oslo Freedom Forum. Is it working? I'm not sure. Yeah, that's the same. Yeah, so then it's working. Yeah, it's working. This is Oslo Freedom Forum this year, and I had the honor of receiving the award of Václav Havel for the project that was removed last year from Asia Now with the excuse that the project is extremely political. And let's first watch this. I received this award from the hands of Mr. Farahmand, parliamentary member in Oslo, who is originally Iranian. And I had 4 minutes to give a speech on that stage, and this is the speech first. I want you, please listen to it, then I will start. Thank you. Thank you for the choice of the Paycon art car to pick a subject which has been kept as a taboo for many years. And thanks to the recognition of this the importance of this choice by the Human Rights Foundation, I have the chance to an opportunity to share a few words with you. I'm glad to be the first artist to transform this historic Paycon to an artwork, to bring awareness to the horrific living condition and violation of human rights against my fellow LGBTQ+ community in my home country, Iran. The main inspiration comes after the tragic death of Alireza Fazeli by his male relatives in May 2021, simply for being gay. Alireza's death is a cruel reminder to all of us of the systematic violence we LGBTQ people face in Iran on a daily basis, either as a result of government oppression or society. The anti-LGBTQ laws, and more specifically, the capital punishment, is the cause of displacement of many Iranian LGBTQ people inside and outside of Iran. Those who manage to escape end up being trapped in Turkey for years, a country that is increasingly putting more and more pressure on their own queer community and queer refugees. Sadly, after enduring years of hardship, only a small number of these people get placed in a third safe country where they would need to start their lives from zero again. It's needless to say that my experience as an Iranian queer person has not been an easy one either. But I'm glad that with the safety and freedom that France granted me, I am able to do an artwork like this in which many people might find their voice. I'm sure there are so many others who have the same potential, but just because of not having this privilege, they are not able to express themselves. I hope those countries that can grant a safe home to the people like me continue to do so until a day no one has to leave their home country simply to be their true self. Thank you.
Sabih, huh?
To be exhibited last year in Asia Now for the first time. And
Thank you all.
unfortunately, less than 10 days before the opening, Asia Now received a message from their Iranian partners saying this project, this organization are introducing themselves anti the actual regime of Iran, and they are trying to express about freedom of expression through Asia Now, and this is dangerous for us, and you should find a solution for it. So the solution was removing the project after 10 minutes of this message and not responding for 10 days. And after insisting that you are cooperating with the regime of Iran with this decision, we received a letter that what you said, if you cannot prove it, with the rules of France, there is 5 years prison, 45,000 euros penalty. You know that your project is extremely political, and all the galleries together announced to the director of the art fair this project on the way back to Iran will make physical danger for them. After that, I sent a video on my Instagram, which went viral in Iran. I was invited on BBC Farsi on the news for the first time. It's one of the channels that they avoid the topic of LGBT because they all have the fear of losing audiences. So everyone was asking, how is it possible? The censorship of Iran extends borders to Paris, but it was happening. And after being more than 5 years in exile, sacrificing of seeing my family, today it's more than 6 years I didn't see my mother. Each 4 or 5 days, if she can escape the filters of the social media and the shortage of the internet in Iran in the actual situation, I will have a very blurred image of her telling me that they are fine. So for me, it was very difficult after all these years feeling the hands of those people who censored me in Iran, and they took the space from me again on my neck in the heart of Paris, a city that I thought I'm safe and I have the place to express because I feel responsible. As I said, what France granted me, I've been sent by the French embassy in Lebanon to France. They gave me an opportunity that I could never imagine. So I feel responsible to be the voice of the voiceless. Those 4 minutes was not just my voice, was the voice of voiceless people, thousands, if we don't say million. This project was removed with the judgment that the organization is a political organization, they are extremely right, or so many other things, which caused some people in Iran sharing on their social media that these 2 galleries, they discovered the propaganda of Americans and Israelis who were trying to do a propaganda through this project. And I had my mom on the phone crying, saying, please stop whatever you're doing, because this regime can do anything to anyone, and I cannot live one day after you. But I was like, Mom, I didn't do anything. I've just tried to be the voice of my community. So since last year, I was insisting to have the voice to receive this moment. For a whole year, I was messaging, thanks for nothing. I'm glad, end of that, finally, after a year, thank you so much for giving me this platform, because it's never late. But even now, we see no one from Asia now is here, but I hope they will watch the video after. Thank you for being here. But, well, I appreciate this moment that I can speak and just say one thing, what I was trying to say. We need to open our eyes because things are not that simple. They could convince so many people to not hear my voice, to not respond to me with saying it's more complicated than what you can understand. And I will say, if it's complicated to understand, it is for everyone. A French person who've never visited my country cannot tell me if I've been manipulated with the Americans. Under what sort of judgment we can say what was the final announce that is printed in New York Times, saying that this organization is trying to use LGBT for doing other things on behind. But I'm today here, you saw, we received this Human Rights Award. This speech was not about any other political agenda. It was the first time I had the opportunity to speak. All those people who put pressure on the art fair to remove my project, they never came to me to see even if I'm alive. I'm not expecting them to give me any other opportunities. to have the media. But I'm coming from a region that a father let himself to cut the head of his son simply just because he's gay. I have to speak out. It's not me who decides to be political. When they execute gay people in Iran, now 2 lesbians are waiting in the prison to be executed. They didn't ask to be politicized. It's the rules. We've been politicized. I didn't decide my love be political, but I am politicized, so whatever I do is political. Today when I see the door is open for all this moment that they are coming from Iran because they've been recognized, their voice have been recognized, but my voice, unfortunately, last year was not recognized. So they easily could say this is political and art is beautiful as long as it's not making any trouble. The political or queer artists are good when they are dead. So I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I hope next time when we are doing something, if we are putting our focus on Iran, we should accept the whole thing. I wrote the same message for one of the directors. The result was I've been blocked. But I just told them, if you put your focus on Iran, you cannot close your eyes on the rest. Iran is a bowl of art, beauty, those exotic landscapes, and all these unfortunate moments and footages that we see on social media. Today, one of the guests said very beautiful thing. Barbot has said, when one artist is censored, everyone is censored. I didn't receive that sympathy from a lot of Iranian artists who today are here. I hope if they speak for their rights, they keep people accountable as well. I'm not asking anyone, I'm not saying anyone did something wrong, but I'm just trying to keep people accountable for what they do. We do mistakes, and it's very good if we accept that we did mistake, and we let the opportunity people see how was the situation, and we have the right to do the mistakes, but we are here to recover it as what Thanks for Nothing did. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aliriza. Sorry.
I don't think we'll have a wrap-up on what Asia is and how we mapped it, but that's okay. I think that we showed that it should not be mapped and that it's way too complex. So I think I want to thank you all for your time, your patience, your contributions, and just say thank you.